So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's Royal Economic Society Annual Public Lecture, which is going to be given by Andy Haldane. My name is Nick Jennings, and I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of Loughborough University. And it's fantastic, as I said, to see so many people here in the room today, and particularly I'd like to shout out to the great number of students that we have here, both our own current students, but also students who are pre-university. It's fantastic to see you all in the room. I'm sure you're all thinking about putting Loughborough as a choice for when you apply for university, for those who are going to do so. A very good place to come and study, full stop. One of the distinctive things, and one of the things we like to do at Loughborough in terms of our positioning as a university, is we're particularly interested in work and research that has an impact on society, that makes things different and hopefully better in the world and for our planet. And sort of that really reflects the ethos, both of our business school who are hosting this lecture. So our business school is very much focused on purpose and making sure that sort of we grow as a society, not just looking at the bottom line in terms of raw finance, but also broader societal and planetary considerations. So it's great to be able to hold a lecture like this. And another thing we really like to do is really bring people together, people from lots of different perspectives, because that's where you have interesting insights and you have interesting debates about this. And so this lecture, I'm sure, will touch upon many of those roles. So I am not an economist by background, I'm a computer scientist by background, so I'm going to hand you over to someone who is way more qualified than I am to do a proper introduction. So I'm kind of doing this meta introduction to Professor Sir Chris Pissarides, who is the Regius Professor at London School of Economics, and just to drop in the fact that he is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, so there couldn't be someone better qualified to understand the content of what we are going to hear about. So I'm going to hand over to Sir Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, for the introduction. The pressure on me now, I'm shaking already. What can I say to impress you? Nothing. Well, thank you, everyone, actually, and welcome. As you just heard, my name is Chris Pissarides. I'm the past president. I'm here. My role is the past president of the Royal Economic Society, which means I was the president last year, and based at the LSE, as you also heard. Now, I'm really delighted to be here to chair this lecture today. Thank you here at Loughborough for having me and having everyone else. And of course, all you students for the future. And as Professor Jenkins said, do apply at Loughborough, but don't forget the LSE. I mean, we also take students. I hope you had a good morning here. Most of you must have got here in the morning. We're having a very good program for you. But before we start the program, there are some things I should tell you about what they call housekeeping. I do a lot of housekeeping, by the way, not only for the Royal Economic Society, but for economics too, for home. First, I welcome those who are joining us online via the live stream, and we're delighted to offer you the ability to join us this afternoon. I don't know where to look, actually. I look at the cloud, probably. The Royal Economic Society is committed to providing a respectful and welcoming environment at all our events. So we have a code of conduct, which you see up there. Feel free to ask questions and voice your opinion, but always be mindful of others. We decided with Andy Haldane, the speaker, that we're going to save your questions for the end, so that he gets 40 minutes or so to give his lecture without interruptions. So we're going to give you enough time, and we look forward to hearing your reactions to what you've heard. Now, I mentioned that there is an audience online, and there's also filming, but as you can see, the camera is at the back, so no faces will be shown in the videos. In case you don't like that, you don't need to worry about that. Now, today's lecture will be given by Andy Haldane. Before introducing Andy, I must tell you that there will be questions set from this lecture as part of the Royal Economic Society Young Economist of the Year competition 2026, which I encourage you to enter. And I think we have last year's winners somewhere exhibited, right? Now, let me introduce Andy. Now, Andy is now the Chancellor of the neighborly University of Sheffield. I guess I'm not exaggerating when I say the neighbor. Sheffield is near here, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. And, but he was until early this year the Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA. Amongst his distinctions is that it's located close to the LSE, of course. Andy was formerly, before that, he was Chief Economist at the Bank of England and a member of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee. He was the Permanent Secretary for Levelling Up at the Cabinet Office from September 2021 to March 2022. He's founder and president of the charity Pro Bono Economics, Vice Chair of the charity National Numeracy, and Chair of the National Numeracy Leadership Council. How do you manage all these things? It's a lot of work. He's contributing editor at the Financial Times and Chief Economic Advisor at PwC. Among other positions, he's honorary professor at the University of Nottingham, Manchester and Exeter, visiting professor at King's College London, and a fellow of the Royal Society and the Academy of Social Sciences. He has published over 150 academic articles and 4 books, so he's ideally placed to tell us about communicating about the economy, which is the title of his talk today. So please join me in welcoming Andy to give the 2025 Royal Economic Society.
Well, thank you, first of all, Nick, for inviting us all here, hosting us so brilliantly. Fantastic to be at the university with its wonderful facilities. And thank you, Chris, for that super kind introduction, as ever. Chris, a Nobel Prize winner. This could be you in 20 years' time, 30 years' time. It's a real honour and pleasure to be doing this year's Royal Economic Society public lecture with all of you. Welcome to all of you. Fantastic gathering of students. You absolutely are the reason I have hope for the future. Lots of gloom and doom right now, but if it is to turn, you'll be the ones that will turn it. And actually, the fact that we have got so much uncertainty and so many troubles economically and socially and environmentally, you could not wish, as students, for a better endowment of issues. This is your chance to make a real difference to the world. There is no better endowment than that, and that endowment is yours. Seize it. No pressure. Pressure's not on me today, it's on you. You'll be fixing it. I'm just going to talk about fixing it. So the topic, as you'll see from here, is communicating about the economy. This is my slide. I've only got one slide. I don't want you looking at that or looking here. I want you here. That's the art of communicating. Getting inside people's heads with what you say rather than staring at screens. I'm afraid you've got me for at least 30 or 40 minutes. And then there's a chance to have a proper conversation in the room. We were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's because we should listen twice as much as we talk, at least. That too is the absolute key to communicating well. So today's format is that I'll talk for a bit, and then crucially, we'll open up the floor to everyone in the room to ask your questions or to make your statements, to tell your stories about how we best tackle those issues I mentioned at the very beginning. So let me kick off and say a few words about why communicating about the economy, about economic policy matters. Indeed, I would argue has never mattered more than just right now. And the truth is, whether we like it or not, the economy and economic policy affects absolutely everyone's lives, pretty much every day of their lives. So back in the 1970s, all those years ago, that none of you, of course, remember, the famous economist Milton Friedman said, we are all monetarists now. Well, half a century on, we are all economists now, whether we like it or not. Most of us armchair economists rather than professional economists, but the economy is inescapable to how we live our lives. Every day, we are making decisions about our own personal economy, our home economy, how much we choose to study, how much we choose to save, how much we choose to spend, how much we choose to work, how much we choose to game or play sport or chat with friends, or indeed who we vote for, or how much time we set aside to support our communities. These are all social choices, personal choices, but ultimately economic choices as well. They determine our skills, our jobs, our income, our leaders, the well-being of both us and those around us. And if you look at surveys, people get that. The public get that. They get the importance of the economy and understanding it to their lives. In those surveys, typically more than 3/4 of people would say they think an understanding of the economy is really important to their everyday decision-making, their everyday lives. This is, if you like, the essence of home economics. And that's the good news. So here comes the bad, right? If you ask the self-same people, around 80 or 90% of them say that nonetheless, despite understanding the importance of economics, they find the whole thing completely unfathomable, impossible to make sense and understand. And in consequence, a large majority also say they only wish there was a chance to understand and learn about economics more than is currently the case. In other words, there is, without any shadow of a doubt, a ready-made demand among the public to understand the economy, which takes us then seamlessly from demand to supply. What about the supply side of that understanding of economics? That, by the way, is us. That is on us as either actual or prospective students of the economy. Are we meeting, as a profession, the public's demand, craving for that greater understanding of how the economy works and what it means to our everyday lives and our everyday decision-making? Now, if the answer to that question was yes, this would be a very short lecture indeed. And I've still got 35 minutes to kill, right? Fortunately, for my lecture, if not for the economy, the answer resoundingly is no. As best we can tell, we are not doing anything like as good a job as we need to explain and communicate about the economy in ways that help people to make the decisions that shape their lives. We do not, as a profession, communicate anything like as well as we need to help people live their lives well. And as evidence of that, I'm going to talk about two deficits, the twin deficits that are blighting how we as economists, us with interest in the economy, are going about our business. Now, these twin deficits, they are unique to understanding the economy, but economics does appear to have a particularly acute case of this twin deficit problem. And these twin deficits are, on the one hand, a deficit of understanding, and on the other, a deficit of trust on the part of the public. A lack of public understanding, a lack of public trust. These two are natural bedfellows. That which you do not understand, you tend not to trust. And when you do not trust, you tend to shy away rather than seek to understand. So two problems of understanding and trust that are inextricably interlinked. Let's start with the deficit of public understanding. Maybe to illustrate it, I'm going to pick on two concepts in economics, almost certainly familiar to everyone in this room. You'd hear them on pretty much every news bulletin at the moment. So hands up, who's heard of something called inflation? Quick show of hands. I hope that's most people. It is most people. I would say that's almost everyone. Thank heavens for that. Who has heard of something called GDP? Gross domestic product. That's pretty much, again, a full house. Worrying no hand from the professor here at the University of Economics. But nonetheless, David, thank you, David. That's reassuring for all of us. Now, if you ask that self-same question, not of this informed audience of students and professors, but of the general public, you get very different answers. So if it took inflation, in surveys, only around 16%, give or take, of the public know what is meant by inflation. If you think that's bad, only about 10% of the public could tell you what is meant by GDP. If you ask people, what is the inflation rate today, roughly, not precisely, it's 3.6% by the way, as of this morning, just put it in ranges, about half the population says, I haven't got a clue. Not a Scooby as to what inflation might be. And what's true of the economy is equally true if you turn to finance, personal finance, the savings that we make. Roughly half the public would say themselves that they have low confidence in their understanding of all matters. Finance, about 2/3 would say they haven't a clue when it comes to issues around savings and issues around pensions. Now let me tell you, I don't blame them. I am personally completely baffled by pensions. Unbelievably, fiendishly complex area. Little surprise the public themselves are confused. And that deficit of understanding around concepts, around the economy, around finance, is mirrored when it comes to understanding who is setting policy to improve the economy and to improve the financial system. So again, if I go back to my old job, I was 32 years at the Bank of England, the latter part of which I was on this thing called the Monetary Policy Committee, which sets interest rates, which you may have heard about in some of your lectures. If you ask the public who sets interest rates, only 1 in every 10 people would tell you it is the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England. If you ask people in the high street, as I often do, or often used to do, what is the Bank of England, they tend to say it's either a part of government or it's a high street bank, right? And that includes my mum, right? My mum still thinks I work behind the counter at a high street. I was there for 32 years, for heaven's sake. So there is not that public understanding of all matters economy, all matters finance, all matters economic and financial policy. And that bleeds across into the second deficit, which is to say a deficit of trust. What you don't understand, you tend not to trust. If you look at surveys of trust among the public, regrettably, the economics profession tends to rank towards the bottom of the league table. Thank God for politicians who tend to be in last place. But we're not much better as the economics profession. As many of the general public mistrust us as trust us, even on economic issues, right? That's a pretty damning indictment of the profession. So why? How come? What's gone wrong? How have we allowed these deficits of understanding and of trust to have emerged among the vast, vast majority of the 70 million people that live in this country? And by the way, those patterns are not unique to the UK. You'd find those patterns the world over, across pretty much every country on the planet. Well, some of us, without question, does fall on us as students and as professionals in economics. The way we communicate about our trade in public is making it very difficult for them to figure out what is going on and why. Those surveys showing a big majority finding economics material completely inaccessible to them. Only around 10% of the public thinking the opposite. And that problem of communication extends to public bodies like central banks and Treasury and Finance ministers. And one way of getting into the skin of that is to just look at the actual words and the actual sentences used by those public bodies when they choose to communicate with the public. This is something that in my own life at the Bank of England I looked at quite closely. I studied in detail the actual words and sentences used by people like me at the time when communicating to the public. And doing so was a real eye-opener, not just to me, but to my colleagues at the bank and elsewhere at the time. What you can do is take the public communications. Let's take the Bank of England's quarterly flagship monetary policy report and the minutes of the meetings of the interest rate committee, the monetary policy committee, and ask how complex are the words used in those public communications? How many of the public, plausibly, given their average reading levels, could make sense of them? If you do that back of the envelope calculation, you find that those publications are only easily accessible to between 5 and 10% of the public. The words and sentences are simply too complex for the vast majority of people to make sense of. And if you think that's bad, by the way, you peer across the Atlantic to the Federal Reserve, that's a central bank in the United States. Its publications are inaccessible to around 2 or 3% of the public in the United States. Now, economics is a technical discipline. All technical disciplines appear blighted by this complexity problem, but in economics it appears to be a bit more acute. And it matters, of course, because when you speak to the public, you want them to understand. You want them to listen. You want them to act in ways that make for good decisions rather than for less good decisions. If you don't do that, the public will gravitate towards other sources of information, inexpert advice, alternative medicine of its type, which is likely ultimately to lead to worse understanding and ultimately worse decision-making on the part of the public. Let's take an example. Let's take personal finance. All matters finance. We all know that personal financial matters are complex, difficult to fathom. That's why we've got people like Martin Lewis from Money Supermarket, who makes a living out of communicating complex financial matters into simple language that many people can understand. That's why he's the most trusted person in the UK, pretty much. But we also know at the same time that despite the efforts of people like Martin Lewis, there is a real problem of financial illiteracy across great swathes of the public. And the costs of that are very considerable. It shows up in people borrowing too much, in high levels of debt. It shows up in people borrowing from very expensive, non-standard sources. The financial equivalent of alternative medicine, if you like. It shows up in debt problems affecting people's both physical and mental health. Adults in debt are 3 times more likely to have a mental health problem. Over 90% of those with financial problems feel a deep anxiety about those problems. The costs there are very considerable and very real and are on the rise. Now, all of those things have almost certainly been made a bit, or probably quite a bit, worse by our friend social media. This has caused an explosion of views, many of them inexpert, many of them misinformed, about a great many issues, including about the economy and around finance. And that's often added to the fog of uncertainty that surrounds all of these issues. It's blurred that distinction between what is fact and what is fiction, what's an informed view and what is an uninformed view about all matters economics and all matters financial. And social media doesn't just seed these problems of misinformation, it actively spreads them at scale and at speed on a global basis. And that spreading, that contagion, if you like, the informational pollution from social media is particularly acute at times of uncertainty, at times of panic, when people lose their bearings and need a steer and seek their steer from social media. Let me give a couple of examples from the financial and economic sphere of just this phenomenon. And the first is a bank run. Who's heard of a bank run? Who knows what a bank run is? A little show of hands from the front. Well, essentially, it's a situation where people panic about whether the money, their money, in the bank is safe, whether it can be repaid, and that causes them to pull their money out, and the risk is that the pulling out of money becomes contagious. It becomes self-fulfilling, and that causes a run on the deposits of that bank. Now, those runs, which have existed for centuries, they used to take place physically and locally as people queued in the street to get their money back. People said, hang on a second, what's going on there? Joined the queue and amplified the contagion. These days, that information is being conveyed not physically and locally, but digitally and globally, which, guess what, both speeds up the scale of run on that bank and amplifies its scale. That information pollution adds to the risk of a genuine financial crisis. This is not a hypothetical thing. It is but 18 years ago that we had a run on a bank in the UK, Northern Rock Bank, back in 2007, which in turn helped trigger what became, a year and a bit later, the global financial crisis, the largest global financial crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that sort of contagion, those dynamics, aren't confined to finance, to banks. The same dynamics operate in our economy as well. Economies too can find themselves succumbing to self-fulfilling pessimism. About 100 years ago, the famous, probably most famous economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, who said of Keynes? Quick show of hands, most people. Spoke about, this is in the 1930s, the paradox of thrift. Typically we think about saving money as being a good thing, a virtuous thing. The only problem is if everyone saves money and no one spends money, the result is the economy goes into a tailspin. We get a recession or perhaps even a depression. And that is the paradox. Something that sounds virtuous, saving, instead turns into a vice, a recession, or perhaps even a depression. That's part of the story of the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's part of the story of the Great Recession that took place around 18 years ago after the global financial crisis. In those situations, words, stories really mattered. Pessimistic expectations became self-fulfilling. Two other Nobel laureates, Bob Shiller and George Akerlof, have called this narrative economics. Yes, the numbers matter, but so do, just importantly, do the narratives, do the stories we tell. They too can be contagious and can drive economies and financial systems into crises and into recessions. And all of that, of course, is these days hyped up, amped up by 24/7 communications and by social media. So I've mentioned events 100 years ago, events 18 years ago. Let's bring this right up to date and give you a very topical example of the self-same phenomenon, where words and stories have real consequences for how well or how badly our economy is doing. And the example I want to give is the UK budget. The budget that took place a year ago, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's first budget, and the budget that will take place a week from today, Rachel Reeves' second budget, on the 26th of November. Now, if you think back a year ago, when the government came to power into the second half of the year, that was on quite a tide of optimism. People felt change was needed and change was good. And that optimism meant that the economy last year did pretty well, fueled by that positive narrative of optimism about change. The UK economy grew pretty well in the first half of last year. What happened in the second half? Well, in coming into office, the new government instead changed the narrative. The narrative became about the problems the UK was facing. The narrative became about the now infamous, black hole in public finances of £22 billion. The popular narrative switched from a forward-looking, optimistic one to a rather pessimistic, gloomy, doomy one. Now we know from astrophysics that black holes absorb all energy and light. And so it was with Rachel's fiscal black hole of 22 billion at the end of last year. That gloomy, doomy narrative, guess what, caused people to be pessimistic, to hunker down, to save rather than spend. Remember that paradox of thrift from a few minutes ago? And in consequence, a relatively rapidly growing economy in the first half of the year stalled into the second half of the year, off the back of the narrative, the words and stories having changed. That was last year. What about this year? Well, brace yourself for Groundhog Day, because that same sequence has pretty much played out this year as well. First half of the year, UK economy, this year, the economy did pretty well, actually. What we have seen is the second half of the year is the re-emergence of another black hole in the public finances, which Rachel will be seeking to fill in about a week's time. And that's caused rabid speculation about what might be needed, where taxes might need to rise to plug that black hole. And as that pessimism and fearfulness has spread, we have seen that cause both businesses and households to pause before spending and the economy to stall. Words have mattered. Narratives have mattered. And pessimism risks becoming self-fulfilling. It's said in the Navy that loose lips sink ships, and when it comes to speaking about the economy, that is true of the words we use as economists and as policymakers. And indeed has never mattered more, I would say, than just at the moment. So, that's the diagnosis. So far, so bad, right? Now, let's turn to the prescription. What might be done? What might be done differently to close those twin deficits of understanding and of trust about the economy on the part of the public? I want to discuss briefly three areas where I think progress should, and to some extent already has been made. What elsewhere I've called the 3 E's, the 3 E's of effective communication. And those 3 are explanation, they are engagement, and they are education. And let me say a word about each of them and what might be done differently and better to close those twin deficits. Starting with explanation, the words, the language we use to communicate about and explain the economy. In this respect, I look to my former employers, the Bank of England, who have been on quite a journey when it comes to explaining themselves on the economy. So for those that don't know, the Bank of England is about 330 years old, right? I'd say for the first 270 of those years, it was mute. It scarcely said a word to anyone about anything. It didn't communicate to the public at all. That's the bad news. The good news is the last 50 years or so, it's got into its stride. It is now giving voice. Indeed, these days, it speaks pretty much every working day about something or other. The bank's most famous governor, back in the 30s, was a guy called Montague Norman. And one of his many catchphrases to describe his own actions was, never apologise, never explain, right? That was the ethos back then. The ethos now could not be more different. How are we doing that? How's it being done? Well, the key is not just the quantity. The bank speaking every day is better than it not. But if the words it's using are still inexplicable and inaccessible, that does not improve matters. So it's all about quality. It's all about simplicity. And I'm pleased to say strides have been made in that direction. Let me mention one or two of them to you. Some might be familiar to one or two of you. So one is the bank introduced, when I was back there, I was the architect of it, a staff blog. For those that haven't seen it, check it out. It's called Bank Underground. One of the key bits is that the reading age you need to understand that blog is 4 years younger than to understand the Monetary Policy Report. And that opens up an extra audience of 11 million extra people, right? There's this thing called Knowledge Bank, which is not just words, but cartoons and games and competitions. Reading age for that is 5 years younger than the Monetary Policy Report, which opens up an extra audience of 14 million people. And even for the bank's flagship publication, the Monetary Policy Report, about 5 years ago, we began layering that. So one version of that report now is a single page with a single chart. And that opens up an extra audience of 21 million people that would otherwise find that report completely inaccessible and inexplicable. From what we can tell, my own research suggests those moves have served to boost not just understanding of the bank and its actions, but have deepened trust in the bank off the back of it. So if one ingredient of improved communications is simplification, a second is storytelling. Having a narrative, a story that joins the dots between the data. Now, of course, you have to be careful here not to oversimplify, right? There's a risk here of dumbing down or trivializing or indeed actively misinforming the public if you simplify too much in your storytelling. But given where we start from, that for me is the lesser risk. So if it were me, I think we could afford, as economists, to err, if anything, on the side of oversimplifying if we are to convey our messages to the masses. And let me give you an example of how this might have been done differently. If I was having my time again, if I was rewriting history, here's one thing I would do differently. And that thing is how we explain to the world this funny thing called quantitative easing. Now, hands up, who's heard of quantitative easing or QE? That's most people. Good. I won't ask you to explain it. But let me tell you, when we first introduced it, we were at pains to do a job of explaining this as simply and as clearly as possible. We held seminars, we issued reports, we did town halls. And the conversations we had with the public, well, let me try and summarize and simplify you the nature of those conversations at the time we were doing this, to try and make it easier to understand to the public. So the public would ask questions like, is QE, is quantitative easing, printing money, right? That was always the first question from the public. And we would say, no, it's definitely not printing money. Let me explain to you simply what it really is, though. What we do as the Bank of England is, through our open market operations, we purchase government securities of different maturities, typically from non-bank financial institutions, whose accounts then credited with the proceeds, such that the asset purchases are financed through the creation of central bank reserves held on the accounts of commercial banks at the Bank of England. Is that clear? Does it give you confidence as the general public that the right actions are being taken? Will you take that money and spend it? Which is, of course, the purpose of QE. Well, surprise, surprise, it didn't do those things. In fact, it did the opposite of those things. It added to the sense that this was funny money, even more complex than I thought, therefore not to be trusted. And if you don't trust it, why would you have confidence to go out and spend it? With hindsight, with the glorious benefit of 2020 hindsight, here's how that conversation could have taken place with the public when it came to explaining QE. The general public. Andy, is QE money printing? Andy, yes. And when you get some, spend it. Now, you could argue that's oversimplifying, but would it stand a chance of doing the trick? Encouraging confidence, encouraging spending to get the economy going and growing? I would say it stands a much better chance than the path we actually took. And what applies to QE applies equally to fiscal black holes that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Don't mention fiscal black holes because unless you want them to absorb all economic energy and light, right? And if you are going to mention them, fill them in. Don't let them suck the life out of everyone else. We need to simplify what we say and make it sound less scary if we are not to suck ourselves into that black hole. And yes, Rachel, I am talking to you in very simple words and sentences about how we can do better to navigate the rapids of our uncertain economy. Explanation. Engagement. Remember, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen as much as we talk. Improving public understanding of the economy is really important. But equally important is us understanding the public when it comes to the economy. Right? And we don't. Typically, we don't understand what the beliefs, expectations, cognitive limits are of the public. And that is a big miss. The truth is that we stand to learn a huge amount from the non-experts in the room. That's what I found from my time at the Bank of England. You know, I, of course, immersed myself with all my hundreds of economists in data and spreadsheets and models. Of course, I loved all that, being an uber nerd. But the longer I was there, the more I saw the importance of getting out and having those conversations, of harvesting those stories, those narratives from businesses, from charities, from citizens, those that are the economy. That provided the colour, the glue that joined together the numbers and made sense of the reality. And that isn't just my view. Expert studies have been done on the role of non-experts in forecasting future events. And guess what? The views of experts can always be improved and augmented by drawing on non-expert opinion, particularly so at times of acute uncertainty. What's the right distance at which to judge the height of a mountain? Right? Well, it's not if you're on the mountain. You're too close. You're too expert. It's not when you're 100 miles away. The right distance at which to judge the height of a mountain is the middle distance, being close enough, but not too close. And what's true while judging the height of a mountain is true of judging the speed of an economy. We can always improve our understanding by drawing on the view of experts as non-experts, as well as experts, when forming our judgment, particularly when the world is uncertain and topsy-turvy. Now, doing that requires different sets of skills, right? It requires social skills, interpersonal skills, as much as analytical and data skills. That's not something that the economics profession is necessarily blessed with, right? There's an old bad joke about you can always tell an economist with strong social skills. They're the ones staring at your shoes rather than their own shoes when engaged in polite conversation. And there's some truth in that. These aren't things that are nurtured, but are going to need to be nurtured if we are to have that two-way dialogue. Nurturing, understanding the views of non-experts when forming our expert judgment. Active engagement, active listening is a second way in which we can seek to close those twin deficits. And finally, how am I doing for time, Chris?
5 minutes.
Perfect. Finally, education. Explanation, engagement, education. Obviously, education. How we seek to embed understanding of the economy from the earliest of years. The public get this. About 80% of the public would like to see economics hardwired into the curriculum. And of course, all of you here today are studying economics or business, some similar subject. So you are there. But the truth is, the population at large are not. We are some way short of embedding everyday economics into our economics curriculum. Economics is not compulsory in any part of the school curriculum. Up to age 16, it forms a small part of PSHE, which itself voluntary. And if you look at how PSHE is taught in practice, the economics bit tends to be pretty patchy overall. If you looked at GCSE, only around a third of schools even do GCSE economics, and that leaves, 1 or 2% of the student population taking it. Much better at A-level. Indeed, economics A-level has become much more popular over the last 10 or 15 years. I think the second most popular A-level now, I think. We're still only talking about 5 to 10%, though, of the student population, and that dives off at degree level to around 2 or 3%. And even those numbers are a bit flattering. If you peer beneath them, some sharp divides, both geographically and socioeconomically, about who is taking this subject. Between ages 16 and 18, over 20% of economics students are drawn from independent schools, roughly 3 times their representation in the population large. At university, around a fifth of economics students are drawn from independent schools. So a heavy slant towards private schools and therefore somewhat, on average, richer parents. And that's true of the regional dimension as well. So the fraction of students from London study economics between ages of 14 and 18 is roughly twice the national average. I was born in the northeast of England, in Sunderland, so a student born there is around 5 times less likely to study economics than one born where my kids were born in London. That is not the structure we need if we are to embed everyday economics into the lives of everyone. There are some signs of progress. A couple of weeks ago, the government issued a review of the curriculum and put, very helpfully, financial literacy centre stage in that review of the curriculum. That is not true of economics. It remains largely outside of the bloodstream of the curriculum. If we are to build understanding, if we are to build trust, that's got to change. Fantastic work done by the RES. Its Discover Economics programme is fantastic, but much, much, much more is needed to fill those deficits. Let me wrap up. So, several years, about 10 years ago now, in my previous life at the bank, I spent a lot of time visiting schools to give talks, a bit like this. They're all memorable for different reasons, but one sticks in my mind in particular. I was up in I won't name the school, up in Teesside, visiting one of the poorest towns, not just in the UK, but in the whole EU, actually. And the school I went to was in a particularly deprived part of that town. It needs improvement from Ofsted. It had, remember this, 50% teacher turnover in a year. 50% teacher turnover, which was terrifying. Kids there from poor backgrounds, low academic achievement, low aspiration. So this would be a tough gig, right? I knew this would be a tough gig. To try and bring to life this obscure thing called the economy and economics. Anyway, I went through the material, a bit like today. It seemed to be okay, right? People appeared to be paying attention. No one walked out. No one threw anything. So I got to about 59 minutes in to my 1 hour presentation, feeling pretty good about myself. I went to a final question. It was about here. Front row. No, it was a girl. I haven't picked on you, but sorry. And the seared on my soul, this experience, actually, because she said, last question, she said, actually, I've got 2 questions, she said to you. 59 minutes in. The 2 questions are, who are you and why are you here? Well, those are your questions as well. Now, at the time, those seemed like why was I here? What had I been doing for the preceding 59 minutes? And after, several weeks of introspection and indeed therapy, I do now have, I think, an answer. And the truth is, when you're doing this, whatever this is, communicating about the economy, you won't reach everyone. You can't reach everyone. You probably shouldn't even attempt to reach everyone, at least all of the time. Most people have more interesting things to do in their life than this. I totally get that. Whether it comes to interest rates or GDP or inflation, all those are the weird things. Indeed, if they talk about those things too much, it almost certainly means you've got it wrong, right? They shouldn't think about those things too much unless you're getting it wrong. Nonetheless, it is the case that there are times in people's lives when this really does matter, when understanding what we do does matter, that us doing our jobs well is really important to them doing their jobs well and living a good life. It turns out this point in history is exactly one of those moments. When communicating well and clearly, us communicating well and clearly, matters hugely to the lives of a great many people. And that is my ask of you all today. Yes, the endowment of issues has never been larger. But what better legacy could you leave than to tackle that endowment of issues clearly and coherently? My favourite Gandhi sentence is, be the change you wish to see in the world. And that's just what each and every one of you could do at this particular moment in history. No pressure, and good luck. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was wonderful. You can see by my notes. And we're going to have plenty of time, some time, to ask questions, but you provoked me so much about one thing that you said that I'm going to take the privilege of chair and ask you the first question, if that's okay, all right? Now, I think we say too much as economists. Whereas you said we should be open and you praised the Bank of England for changing. I think it was a mistake that the Bank of England did that. And I'll explain to you why. I can use two things why. I mean, look how the general public treats medical professionals, medicine. You mentioned very correctly that what matters is understanding and trust. When it comes to medicine, we don't understand, but we trust the doctors. Yeah. They just say something we try. The BMA never says anything. The British Medical Association, for those who don't know it. When it comes to economics, we don't understand, we don't trust. It's the worst possible solution. Now, that's one. Why can't we be like doctors, like the medical profession? Number one. Yep. So that you don't, so when you get into a taxi, you can relax in a quiet taxi and not have the taxi driver explain to you their theories about the economy before you arrive. Now, the other one is, you mentioned Keynes, and I'm going to mention him again later on. I don't know if you ever read the General Theory, and especially the preface to the General Theory, where he said, what I'm writing here is difficult. So I'm writing with the objective of persuading my fellow economists that it's a good thing. Because, as we know, if you want to influence policy, and if you want to get to get your ideas into the economy, then you don't do it by talking directly to politicians, because we know that politicians are all victims of some defunct economist. So I'm going to persuade my colleagues until I become defunct, and then they're going to be Keynesians. And in fact, Keynes died in 1946, and in 1951, Churchill said, we're all Keynesians now, before Milton Friedman. Yeah. Okay, so what do you say about that? I think we talk too much. I think we shouldn't say all those things that you said today.
Well, let's take a very topical example. Are we over-speaking and over-speculating about the budget that's taking place next week?
Yes.
Of course we are.
Good.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a thoroughly bad thing. As I said on Sky on Monday this week, I made myself very unpopular.
Yeah.
And we'll say it again on Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday and make myself even less popular, I imagine.
You see, I apply my theories, and I never say yes when they ask me to go and talk about this.
Well, I always say no, except when I don't. Yes, for me, this is not about the quantum. It's about the quality and clarity with which you speak. When it really matters. The reason I say no to Radio 4 every day is I haven't got something to say every day, but now and again I do. So sparing, clarity, and quality is absolutely key. You mentioned medicine.
Of course, I agree with that entirely, but when you were talking about QE, for example, I wouldn't try and explain QE to the public. Why should I? I'd say to them, we're following a policy that is going to be good for the economy given the state it is now, and we're hoping that this policy will do A, B, C.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, Chris, you get asked. There's no escaping it, right? You turn up to any gathering of anyone at the time, especially parliamentarians. So I spent much of my life before parliamentary committees. Yeah. Which means you're only ever, a hair's breadth away from losing your job, basically. And saying I'm not telling you what QE is would not go down well, Chris, let me tell you. So the key is saying it in a way that gives people confidence rather than not. That was the key to my point. You mentioned GPs and medicine. Yeah. And that is an interesting case in point, in lots of ways. Yeah. People actually aren't quite as trusting of GPs as they once were. There's lots of people online now self-diagnosing and self-prescribing, which is not a good thing, which speaks to my point.
And Donald Trump contributes to that,
of
course.
No comment. Don't want to be sued.
1 billion.
What I would say, though, if you look at even GPs, and you ask the public what makes a good GP, right? Yeah. It turns out when you ask the public that, what makes a good GP has nothing to do with their clinical competence. It's all about their bedside manner. It's all about their social skills, how well they can communicate clearly and simply with the patient. This, for patients, is the key to a good GP. And what applies to GPs applies equally to our humble profession of economics as well. Don't overspeak, but when you do speak, do it simply, crisply, in a way that conveys confidence and clarity rather than the opposite. On Keynes' importance of, in his case, animal spirits in driving behaviour.
Yes. And not being defunct.
And not being defunct. and it's true that, what I wasn't saying is let's dumb down. Let's not do the hard-edged, technical, academic frontier thinking that Chris and others in the room have been part of. That's absolutely crucial. Because in Keynes' words, absolutely, those practical men are the slaves of some now defunct economists, and still will be. And I would say one of the reasons we have a problem right now in public policy is that there's been too little that politicians and policymakers can draw upon practically in the policy domain. So that is crucial. That need not simplify, but someone does need to understand it if they are to put it into practice, and that's my appeal today.
Can I put it to a vote? I'm going to lose, I know, but can I put it to a vote? How many of you think that economists should behave like medical doctors and not say too much?
But this is a referendum, by the way.
It's a referendum.
Which always go well.
But it's not about Brexit. Show of hands, actually. How many of you think that we say too much and we shouldn't say more? You see, I have a vote. Yes, no, yeah.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
We should get questions. Yeah, of course, yeah. We shouldn't monopolize.
Starting up at the top there, you mentioned Friedman helicopter drops. So that much I like, right? So the use of metaphors, stories if you like, to convey a sense of what's going on, I actually rather like, as a way of, you'd argue that's oversimplifying, but nonetheless, we'd all suddenly see that helicopter, right? In a way that many economic concepts are slightly inanimate. That animates the concept. That bit I like. Do I think it's a good idea to do that? You'd expect me to say, not really. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. But plainly, too much of that. If you drive up the quantity of anything, it drives down its price. And if you drive down the price of money, that means you drive up the cost of goods, in other words, the inflation rate. So as a recipe to all our ills, it's a very bad recipe. But as a metaphor for what might be done, it's a rather good one. Is there a risk of too much trust? And therefore, placing too much faith in the hands of experts? Of course, Michael Gove, during the Brexit referendum, famously almost said, the public have had enough of experts. He didn't quite say that. If you speak to Michael, he'll say he didn't quite say that, but it was in that spirit. In some ways, that would be a nice problem to have, wouldn't it? Too much faith. Because across most institutions and most professions right now, the problem we face is not one of too much, but of too little faith and trust. The way you guard, though, ultimately, I think, against the problem that you mentioned, which is building trust, takes us back to that Montague Norman quote I mentioned about 20 minutes ago. Never apologise, never explain. The explain bit I went on about quite a lot, the importance of good explanation. The other bit, the apologise bit, is equally important. So what lots of public policymakers get wrong is that when they, as they inevitably do, make mistakes, they find it hard to say sorry. Sorry often does seem to be the hardest word. You know what? Nothing erodes trust more than covering your backside when you've made a mistake. When the public know in their heart of hearts you've made a mistake. So it's still the case now, although we explain better as public policymakers, we still find apologising for mistakes really quite difficult. Case in point, We had a bout of global inflation 2-3 years ago. That pretty much cost every government that went to the polls that year their jobs. The cost of living crisis killed all incumbent governments as it was taking place. Nothing could be more potent than that economically or politically. Only part of the fault lay with central banks. Did central banks fess up to that mistake? Not really. They blamed a whole range of other things and other factors. Was that good for their credibility or bad for their credibility? I would argue, longer term, that is bad for their credibility. That, the public are accepting, they're understanding of honest mistakes, right? They think, I make mistakes at work as well. What they are intolerant of, and rightly intolerant of, is people covering up those mistakes when they are made. So although the explain bit of never apologise, never explain is really important, the apologise bit is equally important if we are to rebuild trust brick by brick. Yeah, and for the avoidance of doubt, I am not equipped to provide independent financial advice to you. The trouble with that sort of thing. Do I think it's a bubble? The truth is, we don't know, and more than that, we can't know. And the reason we can't know is because what's been priced now in the AI stocks, the Magnificent Seven and beyond, is not just marginal improvements in how efficient existing things are done. What is being priced is the possibility of the singularity coming to pass. The singularity being the point at which AI exceeds human intelligence along every dimension, right? And the reason that's important is because it's not just that we don't know, we can't know what lies beyond that point. It is by definition beyond our cognitive limits as humans. How do you price a stock for that world? I've got no clue. We cannot by definition have any clue, and therefore we cannot know for sure that what's priced here, whether it's bubbly or not. If I were a betting man, which thank God I'm not, I would say it is a bit frothy, it is a bit bubbly, and don't take my word from it. That's what the guy who runs Google said just a day ago. If he's saying that, I think I'm with him. Lots of possible answers to your... Was it Marco? Mark. Let me mention one, though, which is in solving the challenges of our time. You mentioned climate change. You could add in AI. We've discussed aging populations and demography, inequality. There will not be a singular disciplinary solution to those problems. They naturally blend across multiple disciplines. So salvation and solutions will come from working in a cross-disciplinary way. So not just thinking narrowly economics, but what others of the social sciences kind of draw upon to make sense of solutions. Anthropology, psychology, history. Which of the natural sciences should I draw upon to make sense of that? So I think we've found through history, over many hundreds, thousands of years actually, the great leaps forward in thinking and creativity have been overtly cross-disciplinary. They have come from borrowing and stealing ideas from elsewhere and importing them to a particular problem, particular solution at a particular time. My guess would be that would be the way we'll tackle today's challenges as well. So think laterally, work laterally, be overtly collaborative and cross-disciplinary. That way, creativity and to an extent, radicalism, great leaps forward, that's where they come from. I would not use the language of black holes because they're black. And therefore, they sound gloomy and doomy. I want something that gives uplift. And if I'm going to use the language of black holes, I'm saying I'm going to fill it. Nothing worse than saying, here's a massive problem, come back to me in 3 months. That is not good policy. So Rachel, who I've got a huge amount of respect and time for, and a former colleague, offering solutions as well as problems, I think is really important at this particular moment where people are nervy and uncertain about the future. If I was re-engineering the budgetary process to avoid the pitfalls I think we've seen, not just in this budget, but in the previous one, and indeed I'd go back over the last 10 years, the process has decayed and degraded. What used to be a great show and tell on budget day is now strung out into a leaky, speculative process over many, many months, which suits absolutely no one, and which terrifies people and causes the economy to gum up. Were it me, and thank God it's not, what I would do is re-engineer that to something closer to the monetary policy process, right? When I was on the MPC, the notion of me speaking to anyone about my delivery, that was instant sacking, right? That was instant black bag, collect your belongings, leave the building. And that's the way it should be on all matters fiscal as well as all matters monetary. Keep it tight, keep it watertight and leak-proof, and then have the great reveal on budget day. That's much better than the hokey-cokey we've seen on all matters tax over the last 6 months. So if I was making one big change, it would be to that process.
All right, well, thank you very much to Andy for the wonderful lecture. All of you for asking the questions and for joining us in this event. Thank you to the teaching staff from the school who brought you here. I hope the teachers enjoyed it as well. And of course to the faculty here of the business school for hosting it. Thank you very much to all of you. I gained a great deal. You could tell from my I wouldn't say objections, my question. And finally, I should let you know about next year. If you're interested in the 2026 annual public lecture of the Royal Economic Society, it will be taking place at Kingston University. And the lecture will be provided by Darshini David, who is the Deputy Economics Editor and Presenter of BBC News. She doesn't talk very much about economics because the BBC gives her 30 seconds to explain the latest economic crisis. And maybe that's the way that it should be done. And of course, the Royal Economic Society will get in touch with your teachers again, those of you who wanted to come here. So once more, thank you. Oh, sorry, I pass it on to Professor Jan Godser.
Hi, I'm Jan Godsell. I'm the Dean of Loughborough Business School, and I'd also like to convey my thanks both to the Royal Economic Society for entrusting us to host this exceptionally important lecture, but also to the team within the Economics Department for organising it. I'd also like to do a small plug for studying economics at Loughborough. I've been at Loughborough for 4 years. I am not an economist. In fact, I'm the Dean of a business school with an engineering degree, which sort of shows the importance of taking an interdisciplinary approach. And even in my work, which links to supply chains, I found that it's really, really important if we want to bring about change. For me, it's about not just looking at individual firms, but trying to look at chains of firms, that I actually need to try to find a way to explain things in the way that the average economist can understand. Because, for instance, the Department for Business and Trade, about 90% of the people who work there are economists. So if you can't speak their language, then actually you're not going to get your message across. But equally, and I appreciate you've done a lot of patronage around the study of maths, and actually at Loughborough University we actually have a centre for maths education. With our economics degree, I think one of the fantastic things about it is that you don't have to have A-level maths. And I think that's because we recognise, and actually we have economists that go on to be the best economists, despite the fact that they've perhaps joined us without having A-level maths. Because actually, as you've alluded to, that is not the only skill that you need to be a good economist. And sometimes I think that fear of maths can be something that gets in the way. So I'd encourage you all to, though, perhaps pursue the subject that's closest to your heart as you move on into further education, because in that way you'll achieve what you want to achieve in tackling some of these big challenges in the world. But without further ado, I need to make sure that we spread the word of Loughborough University and Loughborough Business School. And so here you can have some very overtly branded merchandise to thank you for your wonderful lecture. And for you too, Chris. And I just want to say that we are making a real... we actually used to be a school of business and economics until 3 years ago. And after... much consultation have become a business school, but we are the other LBS. We are known as LB, a bit like Imperial doesn't want to be known as IBS for obvious reasons. We're perhaps not LBS because one exists, but we are LB. Thank you.